My girlfriend said her ex was out of her life. The calendar invite said otherwise. The notification appeared on my laptop at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night while Natalie was in the shower. Just a small pop-up in the corner of my screen. Innocent enough. Shared calendar event. Strategy session. Thursday, 3 p.m. I almost dismissed it. Almost. But something made me click it instead. Maybe the word strategy. Or maybe just the fact that I didn't remember Natalie mentioning any meeting. When the full invite loaded, I saw two names listed as attendees, hers and Derek Hutchins, her ex-boyfriend. The same Derek she'd told me 6 months ago was completely out of her life. The same Derek who'd supposedly moved to Seattle and blocked her on everything. The same Derek whose name made her voice shake when she explained why she'd never speak to him again. I'd been with Natalie for almost a year when that notification arrived. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those overcrowded loft gatherings where you can barely hear yourself think. She'd been standing near the drinks table, laughing at something on her phone, wearing this green dress that caught the light every time she moved. I'd introduced myself with probably the worst opening line in history, something about the questionable punch, and somehow we'd ended up talking for 3 hours straight. She was a marketing consultant, sharp and funny, with this way of tilting her head when she listened that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We'd exchanged numbers that night, texted constantly for a week, and had our first date at an Italian place in the village, where the pasta was mediocre, but the conversation was electric. 3 months in, she'd mentioned Derek for the first time. We'd been lying in bed one morning, lazy Sunday light filtering through my apartment windows, when she'd gotten a text that made her entire body tense. I'd asked if everything was okay. She'd been quiet for a long moment before explaining that her ex had tried to contact her through a mutual friend. Her voice had gone flat, distant, as she described their relationship. 2 years together. Controlling behavior that had started small and grown. Isolation from friends and family. Arguments that left her second-guessing her own memory. She'd finally left him 8 months before meeting me, she said, and the split had been ugly. Threats, accusations. Deleted social media accounts and a changed phone number just to get away from him. He'd moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, she told me, and she'd blocked him everywhere. She was done, she said, completely done. Never looking back. I'd believed her. Why wouldn't I? She seemed genuinely shaken talking about him. Her hands had trembled slightly as she'd scrolled through her phone, showing me her blocked contacts list, his name right there. She'd even shown me a folder of old screenshots she'd kept as evidence, just in case, she said. Messages from Derek during their relationship, controlling texts, demands to know where she was, accusations when she didn't respond fast enough, the kind of stuff that made my jaw clench reading it. I'd wrapped my arms around her that morning and promised she was safe now. That he couldn't hurt her anymore, that I'd never treat her that way. She'd cried a little, thanked me for understanding, and we'd moved forward. The topic of Derek had come up maybe twice more in the following months, always in passing, always with that same pained expression. And then nothing. He was a ghost, a bad memory, out of her life, until that calendar invite appeared on my screen 9 months later, his name glowing in blue text next to hers. Strategy session, Thursday 3 p.m. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds, my brain trying to make sense of the words. Maybe it was a mistake, a glitch, some old calendar entry that had somehow resurfaced, but the date was current, scheduled for tomorrow. And there was a location listed, a Starbucks in Midtown, address included. My stomach did something strange, like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I could hear the shower still running in the bathroom, Natalie humming something off-key. I clicked on the calendar invite details, looking for more information. The event had been created by Natalie's email address. Created yesterday, sent to Derek's email, which I now realized was in her contacts. Not blocked, not deleted, active. I sat there with my laptop screen illuminating my face in the dark bedroom, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they had to meet about something practical. Returning belongings, signing paperwork, something legitimate that she just hadn't mentioned yet. People didn't always share every detail of their day in advance. That was normal, healthy even, maintaining some independence. But then why hadn't she said anything? We'd had dinner together 3 hours ago, talked about our days, made plans for the weekend. She'd had multiple opportunities to mention meeting Derek tomorrow, to casually drop it into conversation, to be transparent, and she'd said nothing. My hands were cold suddenly. I closed the calendar notification and opened my email, scrolling back through recent messages. Looking for what? I wasn't sure. Some explanation, some proof that I was overreacting. The shower shut off. I could hear Natalie moving around in the bathroom, the familiar sounds of her nighttime routine. In about 5 minutes, she'd come out in her pajamas, probably grab her phone from the nightstand, maybe suggest we watch something before bed, and I'd have to decide whether to ask her about the calendar invite, whether to admit I'd seen it, whether to voice the doubt that was currently eating through my chest like acid. I pulled up her calendar through the shared account we'd set up months ago, back when we'd wanted to coordinate schedules more easily. She'd given me access herself, said it would make planning dates simpler. I'd never used it to snoop before. Never had a reason to. Now I scrolled backward through the weeks, scanning for his name. Nothing in November, nothing in October, but there, in September. Coffee catch-up, Derek. In August, lunch, D. In July, call with D, 7 p.m. Going back further, the entries multiplied. Meeting locations, phone call times, events marked busy with no details, scheduled during times I'd thought she was working late or having dinner with girlfriends. My heart was hammering now, each beat too loud in my ears. 6 months. She'd been meeting with him for at least 6 months, probably longer, multiple times a month, while telling me he was blocked, while describing him as abusive, while crying in my arms about how scared she'd been during their relationship. The bathroom door opened. Natalie emerged in gray pajama shorts and an old college t-shirt, her dark hair wet and combed back. She was looking at her phone, scrolling through something, a slight smile on her face. She didn't notice my expression immediately. When she glanced up and caught me watching her, the smile faltered slightly. "Hey," she said, casual, easy. "You okay? You look weird." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My throat felt tight. I was still holding my laptop, the calendar still open on screen. She took a step closer, concerned now. "Babe, what's wrong?" I turned the laptop toward her, let her see the screen. Her eyes tracked to the calendar invite, and for just a fraction of a second, something crossed her face. Not surprise, recognition. Then her expression smoothed out, became confused, innocent. "What am I looking at?" she asked, moving closer. Her voice was perfect, just the right amount of bewilderment. If I hadn't been watching so carefully, I might have missed the way her fingers tightened slightly around her phone. "Your calendar," I said, and my voice came out steady despite the chaos in my chest. "There's a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, with Derek." I watched her process the words, watched her eyes scan the screen again. She let out a small breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Oh, that." She set her phone on the nightstand, ran a hand through her wet hair. "I should have mentioned it. It's not a big deal. He reached out last week about some furniture. Stuff I left at his place when we broke up. He's moving again, needs to clear it out, and I need to either grab it or tell him to donate it." The explanation was smooth, practiced, reasonable. Exactly the kind of thing that would make sense if I hadn't just scrolled through 6 months of hidden calendar entries. "You're still in contact with him," I said. Not a question. A statement. She frowned, defensive now. "Not really. He messaged me out of the blue about the furniture. I haven't talked to him in months." The lie was so clean, so confident, that for a second I doubted what I'd just seen with my own eyes. But I'd counted those calendar entries. I'd read the dates. "Natalie," I said quietly, pulling up the calendar history on screen. "I can see the other meetings, going back months, coffee in September, lunch in August, multiple calls." I turned the laptop toward her again, showing her the evidence. "You've been meeting with him regularly, while telling me he was blocked, while telling me he was in Seattle, while telling me he was out of your life." The room went very quiet. Natalie stood there, frozen, her expression cycling through emotions too quickly for me to name them all. Then she sat down hard on the edge of the bed, like her legs had stopped working. "I can explain," she said, and her voice had changed, smaller now, less certain. "This is going to sound bad, but it's not what you think." I waited, didn't say anything, just watched her, this woman I'd shared a bed with for almost a year. This woman I'd been planning a future with, as she prepared to explain why she'd been secretly meeting her supposedly abusive ex-boyfriend for half our relationship. "He's been having a hard time," she began, speaking quickly now. "Mental health stuff. He reached out months ago, apologizing for how things ended, asking if we could talk. And I know I should have told you, but I knew you'd worry. I knew you'd think it meant something it doesn't. So I just kept it separate." "Separate," I repeated. The word felt hollow. She nodded, urgent now. "Yes, separate. It's just friendship. Closure. He's been in therapy, working on himself, and part of his healing process has been making amends. That's all this is. I meet him occasionally. We have coffee, he updates me on his life, and that's it. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate. I just didn't want you to feel threatened by something that means nothing." She reached for my hand. I pulled it away. The hurt that flashed across her face looked genuine, but I didn't trust my ability to read her anymore. Everything I'd believed about her, about us, about the story of her past, was crumbling into something unfamiliar and sharp. "You told me he was abusive," I said. "You showed me those texts. You cried about him. And now, you're telling me you've been meeting him for coffee for months because he's working on himself?" She was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks. He was controlling. That was real. But people change. He's been doing the work, and I wanted to give him a chance to show me he's different. And he has been. He's apologized. He's taken responsibility. I should have told you. I know I should have. But I was scared you'd react exactly like this. That you'd make me choose between supporting someone who's trying to be better and being with you. The manipulation in the words was so subtle I almost missed it. making me the problem, making my discovery the issue instead of her deception. I stood up, needing distance. My legs felt unsteady. "How many times have you seen him?" I asked. She wiped at her eyes. "I don't know. Maybe 10 times? 15? It's been spread out over months. It's not like we're hanging out every week." I thought about those entries in her calendar. They were more frequent than that, at least twice a month, sometimes more. She was still minimizing. "Where did you tell me you were during those meetings?" I asked. The question seemed to surprise her. She opened her mouth, closed it, thought. "I don't remember every time," she said finally. "Probably working late, or with friends. I don't know." The casual admission that she'd been lying to me repeatedly, building a whole separate structure of deception around these meetings, delivered like it was a minor oversight. I felt something crack in my chest, sharp and clean. "I need you to leave," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. She stood up fast. "What? No, babe, please, let's talk about this. I know I messed up, but don't overreact. It's not what you're making it out to be." Overreact. That word triggered something in me, pulled me back to those screenshots she'd shown me months ago. Derek's controlling texts, and now I was wondering if those were even real, if any of it was real. "Natalie," I said, and my voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "You've been lying to me for at least 6 months, meeting secretly with your ex, creating cover stories. The only reason I know about any of this is because I accidentally saw a calendar notification. If that hadn't happened, you'd have gone to meet him tomorrow and I never would have known. That's not a mistake. That's not an oversight. That's a deliberate pattern of deception." She was full on sobbing now. "Please, I love you. I made a mistake. I'll cancel the meeting. I'll block him right now. I'll show you. Just please don't do this." She grabbed her phone, started unlocking it, fingers shaking. "Look, I'm blocking him right now. See? It's done. He's blocked. I'm deleting his number. I'm deleting everything." I watched her make the show of blocking his contact, deleting the calendar entries. It felt performative, empty. Because I knew if I hadn't discovered this, none of it would be happening. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. "I'm going to sleep at my brother's place tonight," I said. "I need space to think." She moved between me and the door. "Don't leave. Please, we can work through this. I'll answer any question you have. I'll be completely transparent from now on. Just don't leave angry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't know if anything she'd ever told me was true. Her past with Derek, her reasons for those meetings, whether she'd actually just blocked him or if she'd pull up his contact again the second I walked out the door. Trust, once broken this completely, didn't just snap back into place. "Move," I said quietly. She stepped aside, still crying. I walked past her, grabbed my keys and wallet from the entryway table. She followed me to the door. "I love you," she said, desperate. "This doesn't have to end us, please." I left without responding, took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. Needed the movement, the physical exertion. My hands were shaking. I drove to my brother's apartment in Queens, showed up at his door past midnight looking like I'd been punched. Austin took one look at my face and let me in without questions. Set up the couch. Made coffee even though it was late. Waited until I was ready to talk. When I finally explained what had happened, laying out every detail from the calendar notification to Natalie's tears, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's really messed up," he said finally. "But before you decide anything, you should probably find out exactly what's been going on. Not just what she's telling you, the actual truth." I didn't sleep that night. Kept replaying conversations with Natalie, looking for signs I'd missed. Red flags buried in normalcy. The nights she'd been distant. The times she'd been protective of her phone. The way she'd sometimes deflect when I asked about her day. Small things that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but now felt loaded with meaning. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know the full truth, not Natalie's version. Not the version she'd give me to minimize damage. The actual truth about what had been happening during those meetings with Derek. Why they'd really been meeting. What they'd been discussing in those strategy sessions. I called out sick from work and spent the morning researching private investigators in New York. Found a firm in Brooklyn with good reviews. Spoke to a woman named Olivia Grant who'd been doing this for 14 years. Her voice on the phone was professional, detached. She'd heard stories like mine before. When I explained what I'd found, she didn't sound surprised. "Calendar invitations between ex-partners who claim to be no contact," she said. "That's never just innocent friendship. I'll be honest with you. Whatever's actually happening, it's going to be worse than what you're imagining. It always is." I hired her that morning. Paid the retainer with money I'd been saving for a vacation Natalie and I had planned. The irony wasn't lost on me. Olivia worked fast. Within 3 days, she had preliminary findings. We met at a diner in Carroll Gardens, me sitting across from her in a back booth while she pulled out a folder thick with printed documents. She looked exactly like her website photo. Late 40s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. "Your girlfriend's real name is Natalie Reeves," she began, sliding a document across to me. But she's also been using the name Natalie Hutchins for the past 3 years. I stared at the paper. It was a marriage certificate, dated 3 years ago. Natalie's signature on one line, Derek Hutchins on the other. They're married? Olivia said, watching my face. Not divorced, not separated. Legally married and, based on what I've been able to determine, cohabitating on and off for the entire duration of your relationship with her. The words didn't make sense. I read the marriage certificate twice, 3 times, the dates, the signatures, the official seal. That's impossible, I said, though the paper in my hand suggested otherwise. She lives with me. She's at my apartment almost every night. She's been with me for a year. Olivia nodded. She splits time. According to utility records and witness statements, she maintains a residence with Derek in Jackson Heights, returns there regularly, usually when she tells you she's visiting family or working late. I've documented 17 instances in the past 6 weeks alone where she's entered that apartment and stayed overnight. She slid another document across. Photos. Natalie walking into an apartment building in Queens. Time stamped. Different days, different outfits, always carrying an overnight bag. In one photo, Derek was with her, his arm around her waist. They were laughing about something. The image was so casual, so comfortable, so opposite everything she'd told me about their relationship that I felt physically sick looking at it. Why? The question came out hoarse. Why would she do this? What's the point? Olivia's expression was sympathetic, but clinical. That's what I needed more time to figure out. So I dug deeper into Derek's background and your girlfriend's financial situation. And that's where things get really interesting. She pulled out another set of documents. Bank statements, credit applications, background reports. Derek Hutchins works in identity verification software. He's employed by a cybersecurity firm that specializes in fraud detection, which is deeply ironic considering what he and Natalie have been doing. For the past 18 months, they've been running a systematic relationship fraud scheme. Natalie cultivates long-term relationships with financially stable men, gains access to their personal information, and then she and Derek use that information to open credit lines, take out loans, and commit various forms of identity theft. You're the 5th victim I've been able to confirm. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. My vision narrowed to those documents spread across the table. 5th, I repeated. 5 men, Olivia confirmed. All within the past 4 years. All followed the same pattern. Romantic relationship lasting between 8 months and 2 years. Gradual access to personal information, financial details, private documents. Then systematic exploitation of that access. Credit cards opened in the victims' names, personal loans. In one case, a fraudulent mortgage application. By the time the victims realize what's happened, Natalie's gone, moved on to the next mark, and the paper trail is complicated enough that prosecution is difficult. I thought about all the times Natalie had been in my apartment unsupervised. Times I'd left for work while she was still sleeping. Times she'd said she'd left something at my place and needed to stop by. My laptop password that she'd seen me type. My social security card in my desk drawer. My mail that she'd offered to grab from the lobby. My passport that I'd used to book flights for the vacation we'd planned together. Have they already used my information? I asked. The question came out mechanical. Olivia met my eyes. I found 3 credit cards opened in your name over the past 4 months. Total limit of $78,000. Currently carrying a balance of $52,000. There's also a personal loan application pending with 2 different institutions. They haven't been approved yet, but the applications are active. $52,000. Charged to credit cards I didn't know existed. In my name. Destroying my credit. Creating debt I'd be legally responsible for. The betrayal I'd felt discovering the calendar meetings was nothing compared to this. This was calculated. Criminal. This was Natalie lying next to me at night, while systematically destroying my financial future. What do I do? The question came out small, helpless. Olivia pulled out a business card. You call this detective, Lieutenant Rebecca Thornton. Financial Crimes Division. I've already briefed her on what I've found. She's expecting to hear from you. You file a police report. You file fraud claims with the credit card companies and credit bureaus. You freeze your credit immediately. And you do not, under any circumstances, let Natalie know you've discovered any of this. I stared at the detective's business card. Lieutenant Rebecca Thornton. A direct phone number written below the printed information. Why can't I tell her? I asked. Olivia's expression hardened. Because the second she knows you're aware of the fraud, she'll disappear. Delete evidence. Warn Derek. Make prosecuting this exponentially harder. Right now, you have the advantage. She thinks you only know about the meetings. She thinks she can smooth that over. Give her space. Let her think she's still in control. Meanwhile, work with the police to build a case. Get evidence. Catch them in the act if possible. The waitress came by to refill coffee. We both waited in silence until she left. Then Olivia continued. These are sophisticated criminals. They've done this before. They have systems in place. But they're also arrogant. They think they're smarter than their victims. That's their weakness. Use it. I called Lieutenant Thornton from my brother's apartment that afternoon. Her voice was professional, matter of fact. She'd been a cop for 19 years, worked financial crimes for the last 8. She'd seen cases like mine before, though she admitted this one was more elaborate than most. The spousal component complicates things, she explained. Married couples often have legal access to each other's financial information, which creates gray areas in fraud law. But the identity theft, the fraudulent credit applications, the systematic targeting of multiple victims, that's clearly criminal. I need you to come in and make a formal statement. Bring any documentation you have, passwords she might have seen, times she had access to your personal documents, anything that establishes her opportunity to commit the fraud. I spent the next 2 days gathering evidence, screenshots of shared calendar access, photos of Natalie at my apartment, copies of my mail that she'd handled, lists of times I'd left her alone with my laptop, login records showing my computer had been accessed at times I was at work. Every piece felt like another small betrayal, another moment when I'd trusted her and she'd been using that trust as a weapon. Meanwhile, Natalie was calling me constantly, texts every hour, voice messages left crying, apologizing, begging to talk. I followed Olivia's advice and responded minimally. Told her I needed time, that I was processing things, that we'd talk soon. Kept my responses just warm enough that she wouldn't panic, but cold enough that she'd believe I was genuinely hurt about the Derek meetings. The performance felt wrong, dishonest. But then again, she'd been performing for me for almost a year, every morning waking up next to me while planning my financial destruction. Every "I love you" delivered while married to another man. Every moment of intimacy undercut by systematic manipulation. On Thursday, I went to the precinct and gave my statement to Lieutenant Thornton. Her office was small, cluttered with case files. She recorded everything digitally while taking handwritten notes, asked detailed questions about my relationship with Natalie, timeline of events, financial information, personal details she'd had access to. When I mentioned the marriage certificate Olivia had found, Thornton's expression shifted to something darker. "That changes the nature of the case significantly," she said. "If they're legally married and she's presenting herself as single, entering intimate relationships while perpetrating fraud, that adds elements we can prosecute more aggressively. I'm going to need you to do something that won't be easy. I need you to invite Natalie over to your apartment. Create a situation where we can monitor a conversation between the two of you. See if she'll incriminate herself on record." The idea of having Natalie in my space again, knowing what I knew, pretending ignorance, made my skin crawl. But I agreed. Thornton explained the setup. They'd wire my apartment with audio equipment, professional grade, undetectable. I'd invite Natalie over, tell her I'd processed things, and wanted to talk. They'd be monitoring from a van outside. If Natalie said anything that confirmed the fraud, anything that established her awareness of the criminal activity, they'd have evidence for prosecution. "Don't push too hard," Thornton warned. "Don't make her suspicious. Just create space for her to talk. Let her think she's winning you back. People confess more when they feel safe." I texted Natalie Friday evening, told her I'd been thinking, that maybe I'd overreacted, that we should talk in person. Her response came back in seconds, grateful, relieved. She'd come over Saturday afternoon. We could talk things through, fix this. Her confidence in her ability to manipulate me back into place was evident in every word. Saturday morning, 2 technicians from the police showed up at my apartment while Natalie thought I was at the gym. They installed recording equipment in under an hour, invisible microphones, backup recording devices. They tested everything twice, showed me how it would all work. Then they left, and I was alone in my apartment, which now felt contaminated, staged, a trap I was setting for someone I'd loved. Except I was realizing I'd never actually loved her. I'd loved a fiction she'd created, a character she'd played. The real Natalie, married to Derek, systematically defrauding people for money, was someone I'd never known at all. She arrived at 2 p.m., looking nervous. Dressed carefully, hair done, the same green dress she'd worn the night we met, which felt like a calculated choice, playing on my nostalgia, on my emotions. She hugged me at the door. I forced myself to hug back, led her to the couch. She sat close, too close, her hand finding mine. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," she began. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But I want to fix this. I want to prove to you that those meetings with Derek meant nothing, that you're the one I choose." I let her talk, played my role, asked questions that sounded like a hurt boyfriend seeking reassurance. Why had she really been meeting Derek? What had they talked about? Why hide it from me? She answered each question with practiced ease. Therapy, closure, friendship, helping him through his growth, nothing romantic, nothing that threatened us. She was so good at it, so believable. If I didn't know about the marriage certificate, the fraud, the 4 other victims, I might have accepted it all. "I need to ask you something," I said, and I kept my voice gentle, vulnerable. "Have you been completely honest with me about everything else? Beyond the Derek meetings? Is there anything else I should know?" The question hung in the air. I watched her face, watched her calculate. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, the consideration of how much to reveal. Then she shook her head. "No, nothing, I promise. The Derek thing was the only secret I was keeping. Everything else between us has been real. My feelings for you are real." The lie was delivered with perfect sincerity. She squeezed my hand, leaned in closer. "I love you," she said. I know I messed up, but I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that. I thought about the credit card debt, the pending loan applications, the systematic destruction of my financial life that she was perpetrating while looking into my eyes and declaring love. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. What about Derek's work? I asked, trying a different angle. What does he do for a living? The question seemed to catch her off guard. He works in tech, she said vaguely. Software something. I don't really pay attention to the details. She was good, deflecting without being obvious about it, creating distance between herself and Derek's actual occupation in identity verification software. And you're completely over him, I said. There's no chance of you getting back together. She looked almost insulted. Of course not. That relationship was toxic. He was controlling. I'd never go back to that. You're nothing like him. That's why I love you. The way she used the past abuse story, the one she'd created to explain Derek's presence in her life as current justification for her innocence, was masterful manipulation. Every lie built on the foundation of previous lies, creating a structure so complex it was almost beautiful in its awfulness. We talked for another 40 minutes. She cried a little more, made promises about transparency, suggested couples therapy, talked about our future together, the vacation we'd been planning, moving in together officially, building a life. Every word was designed to draw me back in, to make me believe the fiction again. When she finally left, promising to call me later, promising we'd get through this together, I stood at the door watching her walk to the elevator. She turned and waved before the doors closed, smiled, blew me a kiss, confident she'd won, that she'd successfully put out the fire before it could spread to the real problem. I closed my door and called Lieutenant Thornton. Did you get it? I asked. Her voice came back satisfied. We got it. Not a full confession, but enough lies on record to establish a pattern of deception. Combined with the evidence Olivia Grant gathered and your testimony, we have enough to move forward. I'm bringing her in Monday morning for questioning. Monday arrived heavy and cold. I went to work like normal, sat through meetings where I couldn't focus, responded to emails on autopilot, kept checking my phone for updates. At 11:30 a.m., Lieutenant Thornton called. We brought Natalie in an hour ago, she said. She came in confused, thinking we wanted to talk about harassment from Derek. When we laid out the evidence of fraud, the marriage certificate, the documentation from the other victims, she shut down completely. Requested a lawyer. But we also picked up Derek from his workplace. He's been more cooperative. Started talking almost immediately once he realized how much we knew. Trying to minimize his involvement, claiming Natalie was the mastermind, that he just went along with it. I felt nothing hearing this. No satisfaction, no relief, just exhaustion. What happens now? I asked. Thornton explained the process, charges being filed, district attorney getting involved, forensic examination of their financial records and communications, investigation into the other victims. It would take months, maybe years, to fully unwind everything they'd done. But the immediate threat was contained. They were both in custody. The fraud had been stopped. I spent the next week dealing with the aftermath, filed police reports for the identity theft, contacted the credit card companies to dispute the fraudulent charges, placed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, froze my credit, changed every password, reviewed my bank statements line by line looking for other signs of compromise. The process was tedious, bureaucratic, exhausting. Each form another reminder of how thoroughly Natalie had infiltrated my life. My brother Austin helped me through it, present but not pushy, making sure I ate, making sure I slept. 2 weeks after Natalie's arrest, Olivia Grant called me. I wanted to update you on something we discovered during the deeper investigation, she said. The marriage certificate you saw was Derek's second marriage. His first wife reported similar fraud activity 5 years ago but dropped the charges and disappeared before prosecution could move forward. We're trying to locate her now, and there's evidence suggesting Natalie has been married once before as well, to someone else, for similar purposes. This isn't just recent criminal activity. This is a lifestyle they've been maintaining for years. The scope of it was staggering. Not a mistake, not a desperate act. A systematic, practiced operation. People as resources to be exploited. Relationships as cover for theft. Every intimacy weaponized. How did I not see it? I asked Olivia, though I wasn't really expecting an answer. Because you weren't looking for it, she said simply. That's how con artists work. They exploit trust. They're good at being exactly what you need them to be. You can't blame yourself for being a decent person who believed someone was telling you the truth. I wanted to believe her. But sitting in my apartment alone at night, I kept replaying every moment with Natalie, looking for signs, finding them everywhere now that I knew to look. The way she'd volunteered to organize my desk. Her interest in my work benefits. Questions about my financial planning that had seemed like genuine interest in my life. Her offer to help me file my taxes. Every interaction now revealed as reconnaissance, data gathering, building the profile she needed to execute the fraud. The trial began 6 months later. I was called to testify. Had to sit in a courtroom and recount the entire relationship under oath. Natalie sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, hair pulled back, looking nothing like the woman I'd known. She didn't look at me once during my testimony. Derek testified after me, taking a plea deal in exchange for cooperation. He detailed their operation, how they selected targets, how Natalie built emotional connections while he handled the technical aspects of the fraud, how they'd divided the proceeds, how they'd planned to continue indefinitely, moving from city to city, victim to victim. His testimony was clinical, detached, like he was describing a business model instead of systematically destroying people's lives. When the prosecution showed the jury documentation of 5 previous victims, their faces showed the impact. $52,000 in fraudulent charges on my accounts, $78,000 on another victim, $112,000 on a third, lives upended, credit destroyed, years of recovery ahead for each person they'd targeted. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. When the verdict was read, Natalie's composure finally cracked. She started crying, loud and desperate, claiming she'd been coerced by Derek, claiming she'd never meant to hurt anyone. The judge was unmoved. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Natalie received 7 years in federal prison. Derek received 9. The judge's comments were scathing, talked about the premeditated nature of their crimes, the sophistication of their operation, the devastating impact on their victims. Recommended no possibility of early parole. As they were led away, Derek looked back at Natalie with something that might have been love or might have been resentment. It was hard to tell. They'd destroyed each other as thoroughly as they'd destroyed everyone else they'd touched. I didn't feel victorious watching them sentenced. I felt empty. The justice was real, the consequences were appropriate, but it didn't undo the betrayal, didn't restore the months I'd lost or the trust that had been shattered. Lieutenant Thornton met me outside the courtroom after sentencing. "I know this doesn't fix everything," she said, "but you did the right thing. Your testimony helped convict them, helped get justice for the other victims. That matters." I nodded, thanked her for her work, shook Olivia Grant's hand when she appeared, thanking her for finding the truth. Drove home alone and sat in my apartment, the same apartment where Natalie had moved through my life stealing pieces of it and tried to figure out how to rebuild. The financial recovery took 18 months. Credit card companies reversed most of the fraudulent charges. The loans were forgiven once fraud was established. My credit score eventually recovered. The practical damage was fixable, even if it took time. The emotional damage was harder to measure, harder to repair. I found myself suspicious of new relationships, guarded, checking credentials, looking for inconsistencies. Not a healthy way to connect with people, but a protection I couldn't quite let go of. A year after the trial, I got a letter forwarded through Lieutenant Thornton from one of the other victims. A guy named Aaron, who'd been 2 victims before me in their scheme. He wrote about his own recovery, how long it had taken to trust again, how he'd thought he was alone until the investigation revealed the pattern. He thanked me for testifying, said my willingness to speak publicly had helped him feel less ashamed of having been fooled. We started corresponding occasionally. Brief emails, updates on recovery, eventually met for coffee. Talking to someone who understood, who'd experienced the same specific violation of trust, helped in ways I hadn't expected. I learned from Aaron that another victim had successfully sued Natalie and Derek for damages. The courts were seizing assets to pay restitution. It wouldn't cover everything, but it was something. Small victories in the long process of making victims whole again. I kept the calendar notification that started everything. Screenshots saved on my phone. Sometimes I'd look at it, that innocent little pop-up that had revealed an entire hidden world. Strategy session, Thursday 3 p.m. If I'd dismissed it, if I'd ignored that instinct to click through, I might still be in the dark. Still accumulating fraudulent debt, still believing Natalie's fiction, still thinking I was building a future with someone who was systematically dismantling mine. The calendar invite that destroyed my relationship had actually saved my life, or at least saved me from years more damage before the scheme inevitably collapsed. 2 years after the trial, I moved to a new apartment, fresh start, different neighborhood. Place Natalie had never been. It felt necessary, creating space that held no memories of her. I started dating again, carefully. Found a therapist who specialized in helping fraud victims. Learned to recognize the difference between healthy caution and paranoid suspicion. Learned that what happened to me said everything about Natalie and Derek's character and nothing about mine. That being trustworthy doesn't make you naive for trusting others. On the 3-year anniversary of Natalie's arrest, I received a notification from the Department of Corrections. She'd been denied early parole, would serve her full sentence. The news should have felt like closure, but mostly it felt like information, a fact in an ongoing story that had moved from crisis to recovery to whatever came after recovery. I thought about the woman I'd believed I was in love with. Wondered if any of it had been real for her. If somewhere underneath the calculated manipulation, there had been genuine moments. Then I realized it didn't matter. Real or performed, the relationship I'd thought I was in had never existed. I'd been in love with a fiction. She'd been running a con. Those were 2 completely different experiences that had happened simultaneously in the same physical space. I'd never know what she actually felt, if she felt anything, and spending energy trying to figure it out was pointless. What I did know was that I'd survived, had faced something designed to destroy me, and had come through intact. Damaged, yes. Changed, absolutely. But intact. Stronger in some ways, more careful in others. Better at recognizing red flags, at trusting my instincts when something felt off, at distinguishing between reasonable explanations and plausible lies. The calendar invite that had started the unraveling had taught me that sometimes the smallest details reveal the biggest truths. That trust without verification isn't wisdom. It's vulnerability waiting to be exploited. That the people who hurt you most are often the ones who convinced you they never would. I'd learned those lessons at considerable cost, but I'd learned them, and maybe that was the closest thing to a happy ending this story could have. Not restoration to what was before, but evolution into something more resilient. Not innocence recovered, but wisdom earned. The scars would always be there, but they were proof I'd survived. And sometimes, survival is its own form of victory. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.